Say that a new listener discovers an episode of your podcast and loves it. Now, they want more, but they don't really want to or need to run backwards through your entire list of 300 episodes. But sadly, that's all they can do today. Hello and welcome to another podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. I was chatting with a client towards the end of last week. They have 3,700 episodes of their podcast. 3,700. And that's because they do an episode 5 days a week and have for 15 years-ish. Do the math. It's about 3,700 episodes. Wowzer. That's a whole lot. And we're moving to another hosting platform. And we were thinking, do we need to bring all this other stuff? You know, his question to me was, what's the likelihood that someone's going to subscribe to our podcast? And even if they did download all 3,700 episodes, what's the chance they'd go through and listen? That's a lot. Even if episodes are 10 minutes long, that's 37,000 minutes. That's a lot. What's the chance of that happening? And I said, well, probably none, but we need to think about things. Because what we need to think about is there's more to just what's in the feed and what people actually consume, right? Feeds are limited by all sorts of things. And again, I think that going backwards through 3,700 episodes is not really a pleasant time. Nor is the prospect of downloading 3,700 episodes and going back to the beginning and starting with episode number 1. But that's really all we can do today. Okay, thanks, Apple, you gave us the season tag, so we could download those in seasons, but still, our options are limited to listen backwards or listen forwards, whatever that means. Listen from the beginning of the feed, way back in time, or listen to the current feed and go backwards. And that's not great. Now, we inherited this paradigm of date sorting by default from blogging, our shared common ancestor. Or maybe people would say we evolved out of blogging. Whatever. But the reverse chronological sort that we have in podcast feeds is completely driven by blogs and the way RSS feeds work. Most recent updates. So therefore, date sorted. And our distributed architecture, which means you host your podcast files on your podcast media host. I host my podcast episode files maybe on a totally different podcast media host. And there the two shall meet. That also inhibits something other than that because we can't really put together a solid recommendation engine when content is hosted across multiple hosts who don't share data on consumption back and forth with one another. YouTubers have it nice because the YouTube algorithm can see what you're listening to and make recommendations of other things because they host all of the content on their own. We don't have that in podcasting. So while you might be able to, as a podcast host or a podcast hosting company or maybe just a website owner, you could probably do some advanced analytics of your own content to determine what kinds of things are popular, maybe do some resorting, but that may not work at all for the vast majority of people who listen to your show because they use a podcast app. And at the end of an episode that they're really enthralled with, they have two options. Keep going to the next episode, or see a list of all episodes. That's it. Okay, maybe click to a website. But, in app, there's not a lot of options that people have. How do they navigate from spot to spot? I struggled with this. I just hit 300. This is the 305th official episode of this show. Added the bonus episodes, probably closer to 320. What do I want people to do? Go back to the beginning? No, I don't want them to do that, although they do. Listen backwards? Just catch it? I don't know. It's just not conducive. If you like this episode, you might like this episode. Doesn't really exist. And I think it doesn't exist. Well, I know it doesn't exist because of the things I just mentioned, right? We don't have a good architecture set up for this. Now, you could argue, as I have tried to argue myself into the idea of, maybe I go back to those 305, 320 episodes and do some better tagging and categorization. But I don't necessarily think that's the case because that's set up for manipulation, all sorts of other problems. when you do manual tagging and stuff. I mean, sometimes podcast episodes have lots of different things that they put in them. Mine don't. Every episode is about one thing, but a lot of other podcasts aren't that way. Which is why, for some podcasts, the reverse date order is perfectly fine. I want to know what this show was talking about on July 29th, 2007. Okay, that might make sense. There might have been something in history worthy of talking about. But a lot of podcasts don't put out date-based information. Date-based sorting is fine if you're a magazine or a newspaper, but I bet if I went over to your house and I looked at the books on your bookshelf, they were not organized by publication date. I can almost promise you that's the case. Same thing in podcasting. There's got to be a better way to do that. We need to be thinking about this as an industry, as players inside. How would we like our episodes to be presented to someone in an app? There isn't an app that does this today, at least not that I know of. And developing that just hurts my brain thinking about it. But I do imagine a future, and maybe it's because of the smart earbuds that we have now, and the voice control getting much better. People are being used to voice assistants. They're becoming more accustomed to voice assistants and utilizing them in their day. And voice assistants are helping out in lots of interesting ways. Maybe voice assistant, which is designed to listen to us, has enough technology in it to listen to the episodes. And maybe the brains of the computers can make better recommendations. Maybe if you've listened to an episode and your smart earbuds also listen to that episode, maybe at the end, those smart earbuds can say to you, well, if you enjoyed this, here are 3 other episodes you might enjoy. That would be kind of interesting. Because that AI that's powering all that can hold a lot more information than we can. And I guess it's just a matter of, listening to everything to get that index built up, which is kind of where we think Google might be headed. And maybe not with the AI component, although why not? Google Voice. He said quietly so it doesn't activate. Maybe that's what the future looks like. Maybe all this work we do on search engine optimization, which we've talked a lot about, and other sorts of things, maybe it's very different when this new paradigm is put in place, and I hate to just overuse the word paradigm, and there's some intelligence helping us list that together. Wouldn't that be an interesting world, where when you're done listening to an episode, it's a truly hands-off experience, where the robot comes back on and helps you decide what your next piece should be? That's kind of interesting, which will make us change a lot of things. But yeah, I think that's an interesting future for us to imagine. Now, speaking of interesting futures that we can imagine, I can imagine right now you going to buymeacoffee.com/evoterra and leaving, buying me a coffee. That's what that's all designed to do. Even better than that, however, I can envision you picking up the phone, sending an email to one person who you know who's a podcaster and telling them that they should be listening to podcastpontifications.com. Your word-of-mouth efforts is really what makes this show, especially one that's weird and niche-y like this, it's the only way it can really grow. Do that for me. I would appreciate it. I've got all sorts of weird, crazy things on my brain, and that's what I'll be covering all week long. So, I'll see you tomorrow for another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers!